How people view things on screens has changed a lot in the last century. A lot of the devices people use today are the way they are because of film. It's this connection with film that has shaped every display in the 21st century. They often go unnoticed, but aspect ratios are the fundamental basis of how people measure the size of a screen. Aspect ratios are defined as the ratio of the width to the height of an image or screen. These values are separated by a colon. The height is a whole number, usually a 1. Most ratios for modern film use decimals for the width, but the consumer standards are usually whole number ratios. One of these whole number ratios is 4:3, a ratio that has been around for a significant amount of time. It was first used for 35mm films in the silent era. This was standardized in the 1890s by William Dickson and Thomas Edison. Outside of movie theaters, television started to adopt the aspect ratio, with early CRTs using the ratio, although with certain limitations such as corners being cut off. 4:3 is sometimes referred to as full screen, but this terminology has fallen out of favor. This is because many of the screens today are considered widescreen. But at the time, having a wider aspect ratio than 4:3 wasn't very common. However, filmmakers continued to find methods of expanding the frame. One of the earliest examples of a wider frame was Polyvision, devised exclusively for the 1927 film Napoleon. Its 4:1 projection was accomplished by projecting 3 reels of 4:3 film simultaneously. This achieved an extremely wide frame. Even though it was technically just 3 images side by side, it was way ahead of its time. Not all of the movie ended up being 4:1. Most of the movie would only use 1 projector. It was only during the finale that all 3 projections were used. It wasn't perfect, but still an impressive cinematic feat. It wasn't until the 1950s, when Cinerama was first introduced, that projecting 3 films at once could truly be hidden.
This is not a stage play, nor is it a feature picture, nor a travelogue, nor a symphonic concert, nor an opera, but it is a combination of all of them. In fact, it is the first public demonstration of an entirely new medium, which we believe is going to revolutionize the technique of motion picture storytelling. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cinerama.
However, this method still had its drawbacks. There were a lot of production headaches and improvisations during production, and the final image just wasn't perfect either. While jitter in a typical film projection went unnoticed, if 3 films jittered all at once, it was hard not to notice. Multi-projection was just too much of a hassle for most studios. The popular choice for a wider frame was, and still is, the anamorphic format. Popularized in the late 1950s when 20th Century Fox created its anamorphic technique they called CinemaScope. 20th Century Fox executed it by using a special lens that records a wide viewing angle, more than the camera could typically see with a regular spherical lens. The footage is squished to fit within the smaller 4:3 format, and then, once the film is projected, it will be stretched by an anamorphic projection lens to create the original aspect ratio on the silver screen. Anamorphic film is still used today, but how it's achieved and what it's recorded on changes from project to project. Either used on analog film or digital, once stretched, you get an angle and distortion only possible with anamorphic lenses. In the 1980s, there was no standard for television. 4:3 was the popular choice because of its history in film, but in 1984, 16:9 was proposed to SMPTE. It was discovered that if you took the average of each of the popular aspect ratios of the time, overlapped them, and measured the inner and outer frames, you could see that they all fit within it. In this way, the ratio acted as a compromise to the wider and narrower ratios of both film and TV. In the transitional period, it was common to see the use of a technique known as center cutting, a way of presenting the material originally made in 16:9 in both 16:9 and 4:3 for legacy audiences. This would preserve the vertical image size without having to letterbox. Media formats like DVD video sometimes showed messages like this. Often unnoticed, as long as filmmakers kept framing in mind, edges could be cut without losing anything important. The EU adopted 16:9 by the 1990s, and by the late 2000s most of the computer industry had slowly switched from ratios like 4:3 and 5:4. But even within 16:9 the standards have started to change, specifically with mobile phones. This trend was likely set by the iPhone X. Rounder screens have been used on modern phones to utilize all available space, but this has led to a compromise. Now, when viewing media on a taller phone screen, there is risk of pillar boxing the image. Not only that, but you can actually run the risk of window boxing an image by pillar boxing letterboxed footage. These are side effects of viewing media on screens that support different aspect ratios. This isn't an issue when most media is displayed on a standard like 16:9, as it was created for this exact reason, to be an average of something large like 2.35:1 and something small like 4:3, making it either letterboxes or pillar boxes, not both. Film has influenced screens since the silent era. What we've used to project, display, and immerse ourselves in has changed, but it was all based on classic 35mm. That's all for now. Thank you very much for watching.